8. Monto Air Force Station. The easternmost point of Long Island has a history of military strategic significance dating back to the colonial era. Its first military installation was the Monto Lighthouse, which served as a lookout for British ships during the American Revolution. In 1942, the site became home to the Monto Air Force Station, also known as Fort Hero. It served as a means of defense against the Russians during the Cold War. The base consisted of concrete bunkers which housed defense artillery, a 126-foot radar dish, laboratories, homes, and several other buildings which were deceptively built to resemble a fishing village. Within years of the site being decommissioned in 1981, rumors began to circulate about the military allegedly carrying out psychological experiments there. There's also been talk of something called the Montauk Project, alleging that the government kidnapped orphans and runaways in order to experiment on them at Fort Hero. These theories were published in a 1992 book by a man named Preston B. Nichols, who claimed that he was tortured at Fort Hero and that he recovered repressed memories about his suffering through hypnosis. After he wrote his book, numerous other people came forward with similar claims. And while most of the allegations have been debunked, the wild tales about the base live on and even inspired the popular Netflix series Stranger Things. What's left of the base is now part of a state park. It was deemed problematic to try removing the massive radar antenna, so it was left in place and is the only antenna of its kind still standing. Several of the site's other fixtures are still there, including the concrete storage bunkers, and while the buildings are sealed off, the property is open to visitors. 7. The Nakoma Pyramid. In a remote corner of North Dakota near the tiny city of Nakoma, there's a gigantic concrete pyramid with a circular shape near the top on each side. It's surrounded by several small rectangular buildings and it's officially known as the Stanley R. Mickelson Safeguard Complex. However, it's referred to by locals as the Pyramid of North Dakota. The bizarre site was developed during the 1960s at the height of the Cold War. Designed to support the US Army's Safeguard anti-ballistic missile program, it housed dozens of silos for storing and launching missiles, which could be deployed to shoot down incoming Russian explosives should the need arise. But the $6 billion complex only operated for 4 months before it closed, due to the overwhelming costs associated with running it. There were also concerns about the dangers of firing nuclear warheads above friendly territory, and about the site's ability to deter a Soviet missile attack. It was decommissioned in the mid-1970s, and only a handful of people have gained access to it ever since. Visitors are allowed to photograph the fenced-off site from a nearby roadway, but that's the closest they're able to get to it. In 2012, the Spring Creek Hutterite colony bought the property at auction for $530,000. 7 years later, the Cavalier County Job Development Authority purchased part of the complex with plans to restore it as a historical center and rent the pyramid to a data center. However, the buildings mostly remain empty as they fall further into decay from decades of neglect while awaiting a new purpose. 6. VAZ Bunkers. VAZ is a small island located off the eastern coast of Puerto Rico. Like many other parts of Puerto Rico, it became overrun with US military personnel during World War II. In the early 1940s, the American Navy built a training facility on the eastern side of the island. On the western side, they constructed a network of naval magazines, consisting of hundreds of camouflage bunkers that were built into hills and concealed by foliage and dirt. These camouflage structures function mainly as storage facilities for weapons and ammunition. They're nearly completely invisible from above, and many of them are difficult to spot even at ground level. For decades after the war ended, the military continued to use VAZ as a weapons testing ground and the bunkers for storage. The armed forces finally agreed to vacate the island in 2003 after years of protests from locals. They left behind an unknown number of unexploded bombs, which are still being discovered today, along with bunkers that were filled to the brim with junk including office supplies and other equipment that nobody has any use for. Parts of VAZ remained restricted due to the presence of abandoned explosives, and many of the bunkers are still packed with rubbish. However, several of them have been emptied out and some of them are even open to visitors. They're located along a series of unmarked roads and their entrance is difficult to find. In an effort to improve the economic situation in VAZ, where poverty and unemployment are high, the non-profit Para la Naturaleza has recommended repurposing the bunkers for agricultural use. 5. Desert Training Center. The Desert Training Center, DTC, was a World War II-era military training facility that straddled the Sonoran and Mojave deserts. Also known as the California-Arizona Maneuver Area, CAMA, it opened in 1942 with the purpose of teaching U.S. Army and Air Force personnel how to survive and fight in the unforgiving desert environment. The base also functioned as an equipment testing ground and a tactical development facility. The DTC occupied an 18,000 square mile area that extended into California and Nevada. It was one of, if not the, largest military training ground in the history of strategized warfare. As its commanding general, George S. Patton Jr. was tasked with advancing desert tank warfare. It was also his responsibility to ensure that soldiers were as prepared as they possibly could be for the harsh conditions they could expect to face in the North African campaign. The DTC was divided up into various camps, which were located far enough apart from each other to train independently. There was even a secret camp known as Camp Boos, where military personnel worked to develop an ultra-bright tank-mounted arc lamp that would blind and disorient the enemy during nighttime battles. The project was ultimately abandoned, and Camp Boos closed in April of 1944, around the same time the DTC shut down its operations. Today, the property remains covered in visible ruins and is filled with World War II-era relics, including tanks and other military vehicles, as well as man-made reservoirs that once held water. The crumbling sidewalks that once led to buildings now lead to nowhere, and decaying churches and buildings litter the site. There are even unit insignias made from rocks that remain embedded in the ground that are still visible. Do you believe the Montauk project was a real operation, or do you think it's just a work of fiction made up by conspiracy theorists? Let us know in the comments below, and while you're at it, hit that subscribe button. 4. CHUD Air Force Base. Toward the end of World War I, the US government appropriated funds to build up its air service, the branch of the military that acted as a forerunner to the modern-day Air Force. As part of the program, a massive base called CHUD Field was established in Rantoul, Illinois. When the war ended, the military faced drastic budget cuts, and by 1920 the facility had already started falling into disrepair because CHUD was built in such a hurry. Instead of fixing it, the government planned to shut it down permanently. However, plans changed, and not only did the base remain open, it was expanded over the following years. One of its biggest additions came in 1938 with the construction of 2 massive hangars and enough housing for 15,000 recruits. Although it wasn't big enough to house the influx of eager military enrollees who signed up to serve the country after the Japanese attack on Pearl Harbor in 1941. Once again facing a housing shortage and an ever-tightening budget, improvements were a distant dream for the CHUD Air Force Base. Its population peaked at 25,000 during this period, with many recruits being left with no choice but to live in tents. Despite its shortcomings, the base churned out some of the war's best and bravest fighters, including the famed all-black fighter squadron known as the Tuskegee Airmen. Toward the end of the Cold War, the US downsized its military and made plans to finally close CHUD. By the time it shut down for good in 1993, it had been in operation for 75 years and was the country's 3rd oldest military base. Parts of the property have been redeveloped as various types of businesses like motels and factories, but much of the site remains abandoned. It's heavily contaminated and has been designated as a Superfund site by the Environmental Protection Agency, which means that it's in need of a serious long-term cleanup effort. After sneaking onto the base, photographer Walter Arnold told Atlas Obscura that he was shocked by how deteriorated it was. He said that the property looked as though it had been abandoned for 50 years, despite closing less than 30 years ago. It was covered in graffiti, mold, and asbestos, and the ground was littered with ceiling tiles and other debris. According to Arnold, in addition to causing massive pollution, the closure of CHUD devastated the local economy. Half the population left and home values plummeted, and the area is reportedly still recovering today. 3. Fort Ord. Located along California's scenic Monterey Bay, Fort Ord's military use dates back to the First World War. It was officially designated as a US Army base in 1940 and was widely considered one of the most attractive locations of any military post in the country. Soldiers were more than happy to be stationed at the sprawling 28,000-acre oceanside property, which is known for having warm, beautiful weather year-round. The site now consists of 42 buildings, including barracks, administrative centers, a sewage treatment plant, a soldiers' club, and more. At its peak, Fort Ord was home to around 50,000 troops, and as many as 1.5 million soldiers trained there in the nearly 80 years it was in operation. During the late 1980s, it became clear that human activity had taken a heavy toll on the area. Fort Ord was heavily polluted with civilian and commercial waste, along with underground tanks that were leaking petroleum into the soil. As the US downsized its military toward the end of the Cold War, the property was slated for closure. The base officially closed in 1994, and extensive cleanup efforts ensued. In 2012, former President Barack Obama designated Fort Ord as a national monument. Around 20% of its original buildings still stand today, including a former veterinary hospital for war horses. The site is home to several golf courses that were once only open to military members but are now open to the public, and you can find over 83 miles of recreational trails here as well. The Veterans Transition Center, which helps homeless veterans get back on their feet, is also located on the property. 2. North Concord Air Force Base. Hidden on a mountain in the remote wilderness of East Mountain, Vermont, the North Concord Air Force Base began operating in 1956 as a radar base for monitoring early signs of a nuclear attack. It was managed by 174 staff members who lived in a collection of tin and steel huts situated a little lower on the mountain, known as Quonset Village. Employees guarded the base around the clock to ensure that no intruders made their way onto the base. To prevent damage from afar, the radar towers were topped with inflatable white domes. In 1962, the site was renamed the Lyndonville Air Force Station. It only operated for a year under its new name, before the government shut it down due to expensive operating costs and rapidly advancing technology, which had rendered the base equipment obsolete. The site is in ruins today, and is dangerous to explore due to its deteriorated state. Someone even fell to their death while exploring an old tower on the property during the 1990s, and the abandoned base has only fallen further into decay since then. In addition to its military past, the area is famous for an alleged UFO sighting that occurred in 1961. Just a few hours after personnel at the base spotted a mysterious object in the sky, unlike anything they'd ever seen before, a couple named Betty and Barney Hill claimed that they were abducted by aliens in nearby Franconia Notch, New Hampshire. To this day, many wonder if there was a connection between the two strange events that took place that evening. 1. Nike missile bases. During the Cold War, the US government established nearly 300 missile bases in an effort to develop the country's first operational anti-aircraft missile system. Between 1954 and the 1970s, these sites housed some of the period's most destructive supersonic surface-to-air missiles and were prepared to launch them at all times in the event of a Soviet bomber attack. However, the threat of an air attack lessened, and a new threat arose as the Soviets began developing intercontinental ballistic missiles, or ICBMs. Naturally, the US government felt the need to start its own ICBM project, which would cost a lot of money. And as America's involvement in Southeast Asian affairs deepened, cutting back on the costs associated with the US military's growing presence in the region was not considered to be an option. Instead, the government decided to start closing down Nike bases, which were becoming obsolete anyway. The number of active bases started decreasing during the mid-1960s, and by 1974, all the sites were closed. The remnants of some 265 properties are still visible today, but eventually they'll all be reclaimed by nature, redeveloped by private buyers, or repurposed by the military.
Number 8. Unusual life in Antarctica. Scientists have confessed that never in a million years would they have expected to find life nearly 3,000 feet below the ice in Antarctica, a place where they once thought no life form could exist. After all, between the extreme frigid temperatures and the pitch darkness at that depth, it seems impossible for any earthly being to survive for very long. However, researchers proved themselves wrong during a study in February of 2021 when they detected two unidentified types of organisms clinging to the bottom of a boulder beneath the Filchner-Ronne ice shelf. One of the strange creatures resembles a type of sponge, while the other has long stalks like a barnacle or a tube worm. British scientists made the discovery after drilling 2,860 feet into the ice at a location about 160 miles from the nearest open water. In a video posted to the British Antarctic Survey's Twitter account, scientist Hugh Griffiths explained that this is one of the least understood habitats on Earth. Experts have explored very little of what's beneath the Filchner-Ronne ice shelf, which extends outward from Antarctica and is the second largest in the continent. The team that recently discovered life beneath the ice shelf was attempting to drill to the sea floor to collect sediment samples. Their camera hit a boulder unexpectedly, and when they reviewed the footage, they noticed the unknown life forms. Their findings are now causing researchers to reconsider the limits of life on Earth. Number 7. A World War II tank. In 1944, there were rumors that a young boy from Estonia discovered a Soviet-built World War II-era tank. Snopes.com investigated these claims and found that a local resident who lived in Matasjarv recalled seeing tank tracks near Kurtna Lake. Decades later, he shared his memories with others, sparking a nationwide search for the vehicle. On September 14, 2000, a Soviet T-34/76 was pulled from the body of water in the country's Kurtna Lake district. The tank had been sitting at the bottom of the lake for 56 years prior to its discovery. Its presence was attributed to the intense battles that were fought in Estonia's northeastern region between February and September of 1944. During that period, more than 100,000 men were killed and some 300,000 were wounded. The tank that was discovered in the lake was captured by the German army during the conflict, which explains why there are German markings on the Soviet vehicle's exterior. The Germans began their retreat after it became clear that they were fighting a losing battle. It's likely that the tank was deliberately driven into the lake to prevent it from falling back into Soviet hands. The boy who later helped find the vehicle reportedly noticed that there were tank tracks entering but not coming out of the water anywhere. The child observed air bubbles emerging from the lake for over 2 months, leading him to believe that there was an armored vehicle at the bottom of the water. However, according to Snopes.com, the story's been covered by limited news sources, none of which have been deemed entirely credible. So at least for the time being, it's unclear whether the story is true. Number 6. Norway's first dinosaur. In 2006, local workers in Norway were drilling for oil in the North Sea when they accidentally stumbled upon the country's first ever dinosaur fossil. It was discovered at about 7,400 feet beneath the seabed, which also makes it the deepest dinosaur fossil ever recorded. According to researchers, the odds of oil workers discovering a dinosaur fossil are lower than the chances of winning the lottery. Unfortunately, the fossil was crushed by the drill they were using, which significantly delayed the process of identifying the creature and analyzing it for new information. Despite their difficulties, scientists eventually identified it as a Plateosaurus, a long-necked herbivorous dinosaur species which grew up to about 30 feet and weighed as much as 4 tons. This creature lived between 210 and 195 million years ago at the end of the Triassic period in the region now encompassed by Europe and Greenland. Back then, the area that now consists of the North Sea was instead occupied by a vast alluvial plain, formed by sediment from ancient bodies of water. When dinosaurs like the Plateosaurus lived here, the area was mostly dry, with large rivers flowing through the land. Based on the fossil, the Plateosaurus is believed to be the first dinosaur that evolved to eat plants that grew high off the ground. Over many years, their species developed an unusually long neck in order to reach their food source. Even though this is the only dinosaur fossil ever found in Norway, scientists don't necessarily think that these creatures were rare in the region. In fact, they believe that the area was once teeming with dinosaur life, and that there's most likely more submerged fossils waiting to be discovered. At number 5, an ancient Roman bust. In 2018, art collector Laura Young was shopping at a Goodwill thrift store in Austin, Texas, when she spotted a Roman-looking bust sitting beneath a table with a $34.99 price tag attached to it. She was intrigued enough to buy it and soon noticed that it looked genuinely old, prompting her to wonder about its origins. Young spent the next few years trying to track down the sculpture's roots and consulting with experts at the University of Texas and at auction houses across the country. Thanks to Jorg Dieterling, a consultant from the fine arts brokerage called Sotheby's, The bust was eventually identified as an authentic Roman sculpture dating back to sometime between the 1st century BC and the early 1st century AD. Experts from the German museum where it was once housed believe it depicts one of the sons of Pompey the Great, a high-ranking Roman general and statesman who was ultimately defeated by Julius Caesar. Others have speculated that the bust represents Roman commander Drusus Germanicus, but either way, everyone seems to agree that it's a genuine Roman artifact. It's been identified as part of a sculpture that sustained significant damage during an Allied bombing campaign against Nazi Germany during World War II. But how the bust ended up at a thrift store in Austin is anyone's guess. However, it's possible, or perhaps even likely, that an American soldier from Texas brought it home after being stationed in the region where it was once kept. The bust is now on display at the San Antonio Museum of Art until May of 2023, which is when it will be returned to Germany. Young received an unspecified finder's fee for her discovery, but she told USA Today that the experience was bittersweet since she wasn't able to keep it or sell the bust. What's the most interesting thing you've ever found at a thrift store? Let us know in the comments below, and while you're at it, hit that subscribe button. Number 4. Ancient Lice Comb. In 2016, archaeologists unearthed a 3,700-year-old ivory comb at an ancient Israeli site called Lachish. During the 2nd millennium BC, the settlement was a bustling Canaanite city. It wasn't until 2021 that researcher Madeleine Mumkuoglu noticed something intriguing about the engravings on the comb. She held it under a bright light and took a photo with her phone, and when she zoomed in, she was surprised to notice shallow etchings of letters. A team of experts took a closer look at the artifact and identified 17 letters forming 7 words. While they were unable to definitively date the comb, they believe it originates from sometime around 1700 BC based on Canaanite arrowheads and pottery with similar lettering. The inscription translates to, "May this tusk root out the lice of the hair and the beard." This discovery was shocking because it's the first time researchers have found a complete sentence written in the first ever alphabet-based language invented by the Canaanites. According to Josef Garfinkel, a professor of archaeology, the Canaanites were the first people to use letters that represented sounds in their writing system. Their version of the alphabet eventually evolved into a system known as Phoenician. Then, over the years, Phoenician became Greek, and then it gradually turned into the Latin alphabet that's widely used in the modern world today. Madeleine Mumkuoglu, who first noticed the unique inscriptions on the ivory comb, believes that based on the material it's made out of, it may have been a gift for someone important. While speaking with CNN, she offered one possibility. Back then, much like today, people were ashamed of having lice and kept the comb hidden in a pocket for discreet use. Number 3. Purple Crowberry. The alpine plant known as the purple crowberry is a small shrub that was declared extinct in Vermont in 1908. However, in what botanist Bob Popp has described as an extraordinary find, at least one specimen was discovered alive and well on Mount Mansfield in late 2022. Popp, who works for Vermont's Fish and Wildlife Department, explained that the purple crowberry is easily overlooked. Apparently, the shrub closely resembles a similar plant called the black crowberry, which grows abundantly throughout the region. He said that the discovery of a living purple crowberry plant exemplifies the importance of having keen botanical observers on the ground. In recent decades, botanists searched for the plant in Vermont but failed to find it, leading them to classify it as extinct. Until now, that is. The recently identified plant was found by Liam Ebner, a member of the Adirondack Mountain Club and a trained summit steward, who reported his discovery to the Fish and Wildlife Department. Since Ebner is a professional, he was able to get close enough to the plant to identify it without harming it, which is something experts caution amateurs against doing. Popp confirmed Ebner's find, and in October of 2022, he found 3 more clumps of purple crowberry at the site. Earlier that year, he also helped to identify a federally threatened orchid called the small whorled pogonia, marking the second discovery of 2 previously thought to be extinct plants in the area. The purple crowberry is identified by its needle-like leaves and its distinct purple berries, typically found on rocky ground above the tree line. The species' known range spans parts of the northeastern U.S., including Maine, New Hampshire, and New York. But at the moment, it's listed as uncommon in New Hampshire and endangered in New York. To prevent any accidental damage to the newly discovered specimen in Vermont, officials are keeping the plant's exact location a secret. Number 2. An ancient coin. In 2022, Edward Hines, an amateur historian, unearthed a rare gold coin predating the earliest known European arrival to Newfoundland, Canada since the Viking era. The 600-year-old coin suggests that someone else made it to the island at least 70 years before John Cabot ever set foot on its shoreline in 1497. According to currency expert Paul Berry, Hines found a Henry VI quarter noble, and it was minted in London sometime between 1422 and 1427. Back in the 1400s, this coin would have represented a significant amount of money, the equivalent of roughly 81 Canadian dollars today. Berry told MSN.com that the coin had most likely fallen out of circulation by the time it was lost. However, it's not entirely known how it ended up where it was, and it's up for speculation and debates as experts continue to research its possible origins in order to discourage treasure hunters from flocking to the site. The exact location that the coin was found is being kept under wraps for the time being. Prior to its discovery, the oldest minted coin ever found in Canada was also unearthed in Newfoundland. Discovered in 2021, the piece was minted sometime in the mid-1490s. And at number 1, denim. Denim is one of the world's most popular fabrics. After all, jeans go with almost everything, and they're worn by people around the globe from all social classes. The name denim is derived from the name Serge de Nîmes, which reflects its origins in Nîmes, France. During the 18th century, villagers in Nîmes tried to make a copycat version of a fabric called serge, which was made in Genoa, Italy. Instead, they came up with an entirely new kind of fabric called serge de Nîmes, which was later shortened to denim. The modern version of denim was invented in 1873 by Jacob Davis and Levi Strauss, the latter of whom might sound familiar. They created their version of denim specifically for certain lines of work. In other words, it was a laborer's cloth. Today, as you know, it's worn by everyone. Strauss began selling jeans in San Francisco in the decades following the 19th century gold rush after teaming up with a tailor named Jacob Davis. They came up with the idea when a gold prospector asked David to create a pair of durable pants which could withstand a day's worth of hard work. The thought of durability is what inspired Davis to make the pants out of denim, a classically tough fabric that was made even tougher with the implementation of copper nails. He placed the nails in places where the pants are most likely to rip, like the pockets. Needless to say, Levi Strauss jeans were a huge success. They remain incredibly popular to this day, both for fashion and work purposes. According to the India Times, around 39% of modern jeans are sold in North America, and 10% are sold in Japan and Korea. And while the credit for inventing them goes to Davis and Strauss, it was pop culture figures like James Dean as well as sports like polo that turned them into a commonly worn item.
9. Illicit underground villages. In 2021, South African police announced the discovery of 20 dead suspected illegal miners. The bodies were found near an abandoned gold mine shaft outside Johannesburg. According to authorities, they were severely burned and were wrapped in white plastic bags. Their cause of death wasn't immediately known. A law enforcement spokesperson said that the people were most likely illegal miners, commonly known as zama-zamas, which means try your luck in the Zulu language. The South African Human Rights Commission says that at any given time, there are thousands of zama-zamas working in the country, and that most of them are found in and around Johannesburg. These networks are typically run by organized crime syndicates. Illegal mining is unregulated and therefore extremely dangerous. Those who get involved in this black market industry are under the constant risk of dying or being permanently injured from explosives, toxic fume inhalation, collapsing mine shafts, and gang violence. But there's no shortage of places like this for people to find work in, with derelict mines in the region numbering around 6,000, and those who are desperate to eke their way out of poverty often take their chances. Even more shockingly, the people who work in these mines spend up to 6 months at a time underground living in small makeshift cities, where commodities like food, alcohol, cell phone minutes, and sex are sold at wildly inflated prices. It's a lot like the Wild West, and because this all goes on out of plain sight, authorities struggle to maintain control over these informal networks. 8. The Cavern of Lost Souls. In 2016, a Welsh explorer named Gareth Owen investigated an abandoned slate mine below Ceredigion that had closed around 60 years earlier. He was shocked to discover that the cave now functions as an informal underground junkyard. It's been nicknamed the Cavern of the Lost Souls. It's filled with dozens of vintage cars piled on top of one another, cascading into a pool of blue water. During his time in the strange cave, Owen captured eerie images of vehicles that are mostly unrecognizable. One car, a distinct blue Ford Cortina, sits atop the pile and stands out over the rest of the vehicles. According to Owen, most of the cars in the 200-foot deep mine are from the 1970s onward, which falls in line with the mine's closure in 1960. He pointed out that however fascinating the site may be, it's a reminder of a time when people were a lot less worried about pollution than they are now. He cited the junk pile as a reminder of how far the UK has come in recent years in its mission to become more environmentally conscious. Since Owen discovered the cave, other curious explorers have gone to see it for themselves. Unfortunately, some of the less respectful visitors have left the cavern covered in graffiti, making it far less appealing than it was even just a handful of years ago, and running contrary to Owen's message about making the Earth a cleaner place. 7. Demonic Whispers. While exploring the tunnels of a site called Waldeck Mine in 2016, a YouTuber going by the name of Frank recorded a series of disturbing overlapping whispers that he initially thought were birds or a snake. The curious adventurer, who runs a channel called Exploring Abandoned Mines and Unusual Places, soon realized that the sound didn't seem to be of this world at all. It scared him enough to cause him to turn around and run back towards the mine entrance. Footage containing samples of these spooky sounds has garnered over 6.5 million views. While many were shocked by what they heard when they watched the footage, CNET pointed out that the channel's profile page included a disclaimer stating everything you see, hear, and read in all my videos is for entertainment purposes only, and should not be relied upon or construed as factual, correct, or remotely accurate. To make matters even more puzzling, news reports contain conflicting locations for the 150-year-old Waldeck mine, with some articles claiming that it's in Australia while others say that it's in Arizona. Even more strangely, a Google search for the Waldeck mine turns up results for a location in Nevada County, California. Whether the video is real or not, and regardless of where it was filmed, it's certainly enough to make anyone think twice about venturing into a dark abandoned mine. 6. The Saltmen of Iran. Around 300 AD, more than 1,700 years ago, a group of men were fatally crushed when the roof of a salt mine they were working in collapsed. Their remains were discovered in modern-day Iran in 1993, when a mine worker found the body of a man with long, flowing white hair and a gold earring. His remains didn't look nearly as old as radiocarbon dating proved them to be. This led experts to conclude that the dryness of the environment preserved his body, while the surrounding salt sucked in all the moisture from his flesh, having a naturally mummified effect. Since that initial discovery, 5 more saltmen have been discovered. The second mummy was unearthed just 50 feet away from the first in 2004, and in 2005, 2 more were found. The last 2, one of which was actually a woman, were discovered in 2007. In 2008, mining activities at the property stopped and it was declared an archaeological site, which made it available to researchers. Some of the mummies that were found there were so well preserved that their internal organs remained intact. One man's stomach contained tapeworm eggs, revealing that he ate lots of raw and undercooked meat. In addition to the mummies, other artifacts were found in a remarkable state of preservation, including a leather boot with a foot in it, iron knives, a pant leg, a silver needle, a sling, leather rope, pottery shards, textile fragments, and a walnut. 4 of the 6 mummies are currently on display in the positions they were found in at the Archaeology Museum in Zanjan. 5. Mystery Monster. In 2016, Siberian miners unearthed the demonic-looking mummified corpse of a small, unidentified mammal in northeastern Russia's Sakha Republic. It looked like something out of this world, and even those who concluded that it must be of this Earth struggled to come up with the possible explanation for what it actually was. The miners who worked at the Udachny diamond mine suggested that the so-called monster mummy was a newly discovered dinosaur species. Meanwhile, experts erred on the more rational side and surmised that it was a young wolverine. They drew this conclusion based on its strong jaws and large canine teeth, which are characteristic of the species, but pointed out that the creature could also be a sable or a ferret-like animal called a pine marten. The remains were sent to Yakutsk for further examination. One highly experienced expert named Darian Basinger claimed that she knew what the carcass was just by looking at it. Speaking to Earth Touch News, Basinger, who's worked with mummified remains for years, explained that the animal looked like a Russian finch, also known as a polecat, which is actually not a cat. This aligns with other experts' belief that the creatures come from the mustelid family of weasels, ferrets, minks, and martens. Basinger further explained that the corpse dried out instead of liquefying because of the region's freezing climate, and that the carcass was probably relatively new, since the mine has been open for decades, yet it was only found relatively recently. But she also admitted that without properly analyzing the animal, she could be wrong about its identity and age. What do you think the mystery monster is? Let us know in the comments below and hit subscribe while you're at it. 4. A toxic town. Wittenoom was an Australian mining town established in 1946 that was built to house workers of a nearby asbestos mine. The dangers of asbestos weren't widely known at the time, and it was a popular building material, so people didn't think twice about going near it without taking any safety precautions. Wittenoom's population grew rapidly, and by the 1950s it had around 900 residents and was the largest town in northwestern Australia's Pilbara region. As people caught on to the hazards of asbestos, they stopped using it. Consequently, the demand for the raw material fell, and in 1966 the mine near Wittenoom closed. Since then, more than 2,000 cancer-related deaths have been traced to the site. The Australian government began to phase down Wittenoom's population starting in 1978, but some people were extremely reluctant to leave, despite the well-known dangers associated with the area. These last holdouts rejected the state's offer to buy their properties, even as authorities began bulldozing houses the people had moved out of, and closed down the town's motel, pub, gas station, police station, and airport. The electricity was cut in 2006, and in 2007, mail stopped being delivered there. Wittenoom was condemned in 2008. Still, a handful of residents refused to leave. Several of the town's buildings still stand, and there are officially 2 remaining residents today who continue to defy the government's efforts to clear the town completely and decontaminate the area. Lawmakers have proposed legislation in hopes of forcefully seizing the remaining residents' properties, and it seems as though Wittenoom's days may finally be numbered. 3. Clerks dorp spheres. The Clerks dorp spheres were first found in pyrophyllite mines near Ottosdal, South Africa. Ranging in diameter from 0.2 to almost 4 inches, these spherical and disc-shaped objects seem too perfectly round to not be man-made. Since they were first discovered, their origins have been hotly debated by experts and laypersons alike. The spheres are made from either hematite or wollastonite mixed with small amounts of hematite and goethite, and in some cases pyrite. Geologists have concluded that they're around 2.8 billion years old, which mean they were formed long before humans existed. According to the experts, the Clerks dorp spheres were formed naturally by minerals occupying the space between sediments. Similar to how crystals are formed, their round shape and evenly spaced lines were caused by weathering. Conspiracy theorists, on the other hand, opt for a much more controversial theory, that these spheres were created by an ancient alien who visited the Earth. Another strange story tells of how a man brought some of the spheres to NASA scientists, who told him that the balls were formed in a zero-gravity environment. Of course, there's no reliable evidence to suggest that this might be anything other than a tall tale, and researchers who have examined the spheres ruled out claims that they have perfect balance and are harder than steel. 2. Norway's abandoned coal mines. Norway's coal mining industry took off in the 19th and 20th centuries. During that time, numerous settlements were established high above the Arctic Circle throughout the Svalbard archipelago. But these glory days were short-lived for many companies. For one, it was difficult and barely profitable to mine coal in the first place. This was done via a series of aerial tramways, which were costly and labor-intensive to build and maintain. So, when global coal prices dropped, it was hardly worth it to keep most of these operations running. Still, more coal mining operations came and went over the years, and some remain in business today. Those that were abandoned along the way still litter the landscape with deserted industrial buildings, waste piles, and transport infrastructures. There are also former mining settlements. One of the more famous among them is Hiotham, which operated from 1917 to 1921. The future of Svalbard's handful of coal mining sites remains uncertain. In recent years, the Norwegian government announced that it wants to end the industry due to its tendency to pollute the environment, which means that the remaining few mines will most likely close down soon. Most of the abandoned sites are open to tourists, but anyone who wishes to explore should avoid visiting during Svalbard's annual period of complete darkness, which lasts from mid-November to late January every year. There's also limited daylight right before and right after this period, but the best time to visit is between March and September. 1. Pristine centuries-old mine. During the fall of 2021, cave workers discovered an old cobalt mine in the English village of Alderley Edge that had sat untouched for over 200 years. It was filled with personal belongings and equipment that miners left behind when the site closed sometime after 1810. The trove of objects includes leather shoes, clay pipes, a jacket button, machinery, and a clay bowl that the miners superstitiously buried in the wall as a sign of gratitude for the high-quality material they were extracting at the time. There were also inscriptions etched into candle soot, fingerprints, and an indentation in the wall from a worker's corduroy uniform. Derbyshire Caving Club member Ed Coughlin told CNN that his organization explores a lot of disused mines, but that this one is particularly special due to its pristine condition and the personal nature of many of the items found inside. He said that certain items that were left behind indicate that the miners left on short notice. For example, they didn't take a windlass lifting device, which would have normally been kept and used in future mining activities. The mine was active during the Napoleonic Wars, which halted the import of many foreign goods to the UK. Trade quickly resumed after the conflicts ended in 1815, which is most likely why this and several other mines throughout the country were shut down. Thanks for watching. Which one of these discoveries shocked you the most? Let us know in the comments below, and don't forget to subscribe. See you next time. Bye.